I still have the key. It's a heavy brass key with a yellowed plastic tag that says Room 104. I keep it in my desk drawer, not as a souvenir, but as proof. Proof that I'm not crazy. Because according to the police report, the hotel where I got this key has been closed for 5 years. It was New Year's Eve. I was driving back to my hometown to visit my brothers. To be honest, I hated coming back. It was a dying town in the middle of nowhere, miles of flat farmland and gravel roads. My brothers offered to let me crash on their couches, but they both had their girlfriends over, and I didn't want to be the third wheel. So I looked for a hotel. There was only one. It sat right off the old gravel highway. No brand name, no neon sign, just a faded wooden board that read, Hotel. I pulled into the parking lot around 10 p.m. It was empty, except for one rusted pickup truck parked in the far corner. When I walked inside, the air smelled like stale cigarettes and mildew. The lobby was pitch black, lit only by a single buzzing desk lamp behind the counter. An old man was sitting there, maybe in his 60s, scruffy beard, greasy hair, wearing a flannel shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. When I walked in, he jumped. He looked at me with wide eyes, like he wasn't expecting anyone, like he was surprised to see a human being. After a long, awkward silence, he cleared his throat. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Need a room?" he asked. I nodded. Just for 3 nights. He didn't ask for a credit card. He didn't ask for ID. He just reached under the counter and slid a heavy metal key across the wood. Room 104, end of the hall. The hallway was freezing. The carpet was worn down to the threading. My room was basic. A bed, a TV from the 90s, and a window that rattled in the wind. I was tired, so I didn't care. I threw my bag down and passed out. I woke up at 3 a.m. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't at my door. It was coming from down the hall. I lay there in the dark, listening. Silence. Then again, knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate. It sounded like someone was testing the doors, checking to see if they were unlocked. I told myself it was just the old man doing rounds. I pulled the blanket over my head and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went to the lobby to find coffee. It was empty. The desk lamp was off. The front desk was abandoned. No computer, no papers, nothing. It looked like nobody had worked there in a decade. I shrugged it off, assuming the old man was just lazy, and left to spend the day with my family. I got back late that night. The parking lot was still empty, except for that same rusted truck. I walked down the dark hallway to my room. That's when I heard it again, the knocking. But this time, it stopped right as I reached my door. I froze. The door to the room next to mine, room 102, was cracked open just an inch. It had been closed earlier. "Hey!" a voice called out from the lobby behind me. It was the old man. I spun around. "Come here," he rasped. Then he ducked out of sight. My heart started pounding. Why was he lurking in the dark? I walked back to the lobby, expecting him to be at the desk. But when I got there, it was empty. Dead silent. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Just the wind rattling the front doors. I ran back to my room, double-locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep that night. On the third night, I almost didn't go back, but all my stuff was still in the room. I told myself I was being paranoid. I drove into the lot. The rusted truck was still there, same spot. Hadn't moved an inch. I walked inside. The silence was heavier tonight, oppressive. I hurried down the hall. When I got to room 104, I stopped cold. The door was ajar. I knew I had locked it. I knew I had put the chair there, but now it was pushed open wide enough to see into the darkness. Panic hit me like a wave. My suitcase was still on the bed. I made a split-second decision. I was going to grab my bag and leave immediately. I pushed the door open, grabbed the suitcase handle, and turned to run. But as I stepped back into the hallway, a feeling of pure dread washed over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt eyes on me. I looked back toward the lobby. At the far end of the dark hallway, standing in the doorway of the room I had just checked, was the old man. He wasn't at the desk. He had been in my room, or the room next to it, waiting. He stood perfectly still, just staring at me. His eyes reflected the faint light from the exit sign. Then his mouth curled into a slow, wide grin. I didn't say a word. I sprinted. I burst through the emergency exit doors and ran to my car. I threw my bag in the back and peeled out of the parking lot, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. I drove straight to my brother's house and called the police. I told them everything, the old man, the knocking, the fact that someone had broken into my room. The police arrived at the hotel an hour later. When they called me back, the officer sounded confused. "Son," he said, "are you sure you have the right place?" "Yes," I said. "The hotel off the highway." "That hotel has been closed since 2018, the officer said. "The owners went bankrupt. The power has been cut for years. The doors are boarded up." "That's impossible," I stammered. "I slept there. The lights were on. The old man gave me a key." "We searched the building," the officer interrupted. "It's empty. Dust everywhere. No footprints except yours. No old man. And that truck in the parking lot. It has 4 flat tires and an expired registration from 5 years ago." I hung up the phone. I felt sick. If the hotel was abandoned, then who was the old man? Who turned on the lamp? And most terrifying of all, if the rooms were empty, who was knocking on the doors at 3 a.m.? I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the brass key to room 104. I never went back to that town. But sometimes, when I stay in hotels now, I wake up at 3 a.m. and I swear I can hear slow, deliberate knocking coming down the hall. Checking to see if I'm awake. I don't go to the mountains anymore. I sold my hiking gear. I deleted my camping playlists. People ask me why I gave up the hobby I loved the most. I tell them I just got busy. But the truth is, I can't look at a snow-covered trail without feeling sick to my stomach. Because I know that sometimes the footprints you see in the snow aren't just passing through. Sometimes they are waiting. It happened 2 years ago, just before Christmas. My family owns a small wooden cabin about 3 hours south of the city, deep in the Cascade foothills. It's a beautiful place, surrounded by dense pines and total silence. My parents were supposed to meet me there on the weekend, but I had some time off work, so I decided to drive up early on a Wednesday to get the place ready and have some alone time. That was my first mistake. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sky was already turning that bruised purple color it gets in winter. I unpacked my car, started a fire in the wood stove, and settled in. The first night was peaceful. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and the crackling of the logs. I felt safe. I felt isolated in a good way. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh layer of snow. Maybe 2 inches, pristine and white, covering everything like a blanket. It was breathtaking. I decided to go for a morning walk. There's a rugged footpath that loops around the property, maybe a 2-mile hike through the woods. I grabbed my coffee thermos, put on my boots, and headed out. Crucially, I didn't lock the front door behind me. I mean, why would I? I was miles from the nearest town. I was on private property. Who was going to break in? The walk was quiet. Too quiet. About halfway through the loop, I noticed something on the trail. Footprints. Fresh, heavy boot prints in the new snow. They were large, definitely a man's size. I stopped and stared at them. My first thought was a hunter or a ranger. But as I looked closer, I realized the stride was uneven, scuffed, like someone was dragging their feet or moving with a heavy purpose. I felt a prickle of unease, so I decided to cut the walk short and head back to the cabin. As I walked back, I noticed the footprints were following the trail, heading in the exact same direction I was, towards the cabin. I walked faster. The silence of the woods suddenly felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me. I turned the final corner, and the cabin came into view. I stopped dead in my tracks. The footprints left the trail. They cut straight across the yard, marching directly up the porch steps, and stopped right at my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the windows, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just the empty, snowy yard. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe a ranger checked the cabin to see if anyone was home and then left. I ran up the steps, rushed inside, and slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt instantly. I spent the next 4 hours in a state of high anxiety. I checked every window. I drew all the blinds. I sat in the living room with a fire poker next to me on the couch. But as the afternoon dragged on, my brain started to rationalize it. Relax, I told myself. Whoever it was probably knocked, saw no one answered, and walked away back to the main road. The sun started to set. The cabin grew dark. The shadows from the fire stretched across the walls like long black fingers. I needed to sleep eventually, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I needed to know I was safe. I needed to confirm that the stranger had left. So I did something that still haunts me in my nightmares. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it quietly. I cracked it open just an inch to look at the snow on the porch. I wanted to see the footprints leading away from the door. I wanted to see the trail of boots walking back into the woods. I looked down. I saw the footprints coming up the stairs. I saw them crossing the porch. I saw them stopping at the doormat. But there were no footprints leading away. The snow around the path was perfectly smooth, untouched. My blood turned to ice. My breath caught in my throat. If there were no tracks leaving, that meant he didn't leave. And if he didn't leave... I slowly pulled the door shut. I didn't lock it this time. I didn't want to make a sound. I turned around to face the living room. The cabin was silent. The only light came from the dying fire. From where I stood, I could see down the short hallway that led to the 2 bedrooms. The door to the guest bedroom, the one I wasn't using, was wide open. It had been closed this morning. And standing in the doorway was a silhouette. A man, tall, dressed in dark, heavy winter gear. He was standing perfectly still, watching me. He had been there the whole time. When I was making coffee, when I was checking the windows, when I was sitting on the couch trying to calm down. He was just feet away, waiting. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. That sound broke my paralysis. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I spun around, threw the front door open, and sprinted. I ran to my car without shoes on. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them in the snow, screaming internally. I grabbed them, jammed the key in the ignition, and floored it. As my headlights swept across the front of the cabin, I saw him. He was standing on the porch, just watching me leave. He raised one hand in a slow, mocking wave. I drove until I hit the police station in the next town. I was shaking so hard I couldn't hold a pen to write my statement. The police went out to the cabin that night. They didn't find him. He was gone. But they found something else. In the guest bedroom closet, they found a sleeping bag that wasn't ours. They found candy wrappers, and they found a small hole carved into the drywall, a peephole that looked directly into the living room. The police estimated he had been living in that crawl space for at least 2 days before I arrived. He watched me unpack. He watched me sleep the first night. And when I went for my walk and left the door unlocked, he decided to come out and make himself at home. I sold the cabin a month later. I never stepped foot on that property again. But sometimes, when it snows, I catch myself looking at the ground, checking the tracks, making sure that whoever walked in actually walked out. I was driving somewhere in northern Oregon when it happened. I don't remember the exact highway number. It wasn't a main road, just one of those empty 2-lane blacktops surrounded by miles of dense, ancient forest. I'd been driving for hours. The sun had gone down long ago, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the fog. I was tired, zoning out, listening to a podcast to keep myself awake. I'd been watching my gas gauge for the last hour. I knew I was low, but when the warning light finally dinged, I wasn't too worried. I checked my GPS. It said the next gas station was 35 minutes away. I figured I could make it. I kept driving. About 10 minutes went by. I glanced at my phone. It still said 35 minutes remaining. I frowned, but figured it was just lagging. I drove for another 10 minutes. I checked again. 35 minutes remaining. That's when the anxiety started to creep in. The little blue car icon on the screen wasn't moving. The map was frozen. I tried to refresh the app. I tapped the screen. And then my car sputtered. It wasn't a loud noise, just a subtle cough from the engine. Then the steering wheel locked up. The dashboard lights flickered and died. The headlights cut out. I coasted into pitch-black darkness. I managed to guide the car onto the narrow gravel shoulder before it came to a complete stop. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. I grabbed my phone to call AAA. No service. I held the phone up, waving it around the dark cab. 0 bars. I was stranded in the dead zone. I sat there for a minute, trying to control my breathing. I did the math. If the GPS had been frozen for 20 minutes, I might be close to the station. Or I might be 10 miles away. I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't stay in the car. It was getting colder by the second. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my glove box, locked the car, and started walking. The fog was thick. My flashlight beam just bounced off the white mist, barely illuminating 5 feet in front of me. On both sides of the road, the forest was a wall of black trees. I walked for maybe 10 minutes. My boots crunched loudly on the asphalt. Then I heard it. Snap. It came from the woods to my right. It sounded like a heavy branch breaking under the weight of a foot. I stopped. The noise stopped. I shone my light into the trees. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and pathetic in the open air. No answer, just the wind. I kept walking faster now. A few hundred yards later, I saw a shape in the ditch up ahead. It was a car, an old, beat-up sedan. It wasn't crashed. It looked like someone had driven it off the road, pushing it deep into the brush to hide it. The windows were rolled down. Leaves had gathered on the seats. It looked like it had been there for weeks. My stomach dropped. Why would someone abandon a car out here? I didn't stop to investigate. I hurried past it. That's when the rustling started again. This time it wasn't just one snap. It was continuous. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And it wasn't just one person. I could hear movement on both sides of the road now. Shadows moving between the trees, keeping pace with me. It was a group. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They knew I was alone. They knew I had nowhere to go. I broke into a jog. The footsteps in the woods matched my speed. I started running. They started running. I could hear them getting closer to the tree line, ready to cut me off. I gripped my flashlight like a club, preparing for the worst. Then, a blinding light flooded the road from behind me, a roar of an engine. I spun around, shielding my eyes. A pickup truck was barreling down the road. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The truck screeched to a halt right next to me. The driver, an older man with a gray beard, rolled down the window. He looked terrified. "Get in!" he yelled. "Now!" I didn't hesitate. I ripped the door open and jumped into the passenger seat. "Lock the door," he ordered. As we peeled away, I looked back. In the red glow of the taillights, I saw them. 3 or 4 figures stepped out of the tree line onto the road. They were just standing there, watching us leave. The man drove me to the gas station. He told me he lived nearby and that locals never stop on that stretch of road at night. He said people go missing there. Cars disappear. We called the police from the station. A sheriff's deputy drove me back to my car an hour later, but when we got to the spot where I broke down, my car was gone. The road shoulder was empty. The deputy got out and shone his spotlight into the woods. "There," he said. My car was 50 yards deep in the forest. Someone, a group of people, had physically pushed it off the road and covered it with branches and brush. Just like the abandoned sedan I had passed earlier. They were hiding it. If that truck hadn't come, I would have disappeared into those woods, and my car would have vanished with me. I don't take back roads anymore, and if my GPS ever freezes, I turn around immediately.